Ready, rock? Excellent. Uh-oh. You're gonna. No. Whatever you guys are comfortable with. You wanted to sleep? Who said that? Well, good morning. How are we doing? Good as we can be. Did the state have some nice things to say this morning? Yeah. No. Hopefully that representative is still not in the room, but well, today's a big day. It's not only the last day, but I'll be doing 3 programs today, so I'm looking forward to this challenge. Be nice. Let me ask you, how often are we at a crime scene? Here and there? Depends on where you work. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Correct. Which was the articulate or the birth of this program many years ago. Because the more that I looked at it, responding with local EMS and fire departments to multiple calls when I was on road patrol, the more I got thinking about the fact that, twiddling of the fingers and the VSI doesn't make everything safe. So from that perspective, I'm wanted to go ahead and build something out a little bit more to not only make you more aware, but also to raise your level of concern just a tad to ensure that you understand it's not necessarily if you're at a crime scene. It's more of a matter of when you're at a crime scene or a potential crime scene, which makes a difference. And before I go through a simulated call real quick, and we go through some excellent debate about this, how many of you know what, I'll hold that question. Disregard. So, picture this call. You're on the scene. You walk through the door, and this is what you see. You see it all the time? That could be a normal scene for some of you. Crime scene or no crime scene? Possible? Okay, well, what brings you down that road? Well, you were summoned to a 60, let's say a mid 70-year-old female, possibly deceased. And you get there, she's deceased. You see morbidity. You see that this is not a revivable case. You know immediately that this is not a good thing. You can't work her. Go ahead. So for people online, I'm just going to re-articulate that there appears to be a struggle. There's stuff on the floor. The table is moved out. Okay. I'm sorry? Online says it's a black screen. I'm going to have to call in my expert, Sean, here, because all 3 monitors I'm looking at, there's a picture. I'll go back and forth to see if it pops up, but keep us advised. Thank you. I don't see a black screen. Tell them to check their monitor if it's one person. So let's continue with the crime scene, or I'm sorry, with the scene. There's clothing issues. What do you mean? The patient's not clothed? Okay. What else could this white thing in front of the wheelchair be? A Chuck's pad? Yep. Good. Can we shut that light off, please? Who is it? You're doing lights. Promise me you won't close your eyes. Yeah, you don't want to do that here. So. That looks like a nightgown? Oh, on them. Yes, absolutely. Moved up. Okay. So you're favoring maybe not a crime scene. Is that what I'm thinking?
No, I'm just saying that would be my first thought, because a lot of the people that we go on Instagram here
Okay, so could we, let's agree on this. It's not a normal deceased scene. Okay, there is the potential for a crime. Okay, we're suspected crime scene here. All right, that said, what kind of law is being violated here? Okay, so, well, is it elder abuse that the deceased, or would the charges be higher? Could this be a possible homicide? Could, all right, could be, right? So these come out of, and I'm describing it in New York State version, which I'm sure you have a very, very, very similar version. This comes out of the penal law. You can't steal from people, you can't go ahead and kill people, you can't assault people, that kind of thing, all right? So could you be at a suspected crime scene here? Yeah, potentially, potentially. Could this person have clutched their chest, tried to get up from the wheelchair? The wheelchair was not locked, and they stood up, pushed the table, and they went for the wheelchair and fell down and went boom. And that could have been a couple days ago, right? So let's keep the non-crime in our mindset as well. Can we touch anything here? You wouldn't, maybe? Don't be, okay, thank you. You check for a pulse. Do we have to put our leads on to confirm? Okay, so we have to move stuff here. Have you always been taught do not touch anything? Good, good. I'm not trying to set you up for failure here, but there's a mentality in EMS that if you come upon a potential crime scene, don't touch a thing. Let law enforcement do it. I need to break you of that if that's what you're thinking. Not that you should be going to touch everything, okay? But if this stuff prohibits you from doing your job, you may step in. What about this crime scene or potential scene? Uh-oh. I think I just got to move the cursor. Hold on. There you go. Crime scene or no crime scene? Were they drinking or not? Okay. If they were, is it a crime scene? If they're dead? So if they're not dead and they're drunk driving, is it illegal? Okay, so it could be a crime scene. If they took somebody out, yeah. What if they were? Okay. So private property damage? Possibly. I wouldn't give a ticket for private property damage in this one. So, but obviously they left the roadway for a reason. Could it just been Tom, Dick, or Harry driving along and lost control of their car? Could they receive a citation for it? Possibly. What about if it was somebody running from the police? So now we have penal charges on top of vehicle and traffic charges that are here. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. So there's all this potentiation. Good. Let's take a look at one more. You get a 16-year-old, 20-year-old, difficulty breathing, sitting in the bed to the right-hand part of the screen. Crime scene or no crime scene? Right here? No, it's more like a lollipop. What's in the white bag on the bed? Good. Drug paraphernalia? A little hookah there? Yeah. Yeah, hookah, bong, same thing, right? Probably smoking weed, crack, whatever. Meth, who knows? Anybody see the pill bottle down here? Anybody see anything else that stands out? The Whippet? What's wrong with the Whippet? They just want to clean their keyboard, don't they? Way too much Mountain Dew. Does anybody notice anything else about here that's a little bit more glaring? What's your name? What's your name? Hillary just asked, why is there milk in the Gatorade bottle? Because within that Gatorade bottle is not only a powdery substance on the bottom here, but a whole bunch of lithium strips in here within a solvent sitting in there. Shake and bake. This is a meth scene. Okay. So shake and bake is just a easier, effective way to make methamphetamine. I got another 3-hour program on that if you want to learn how to do it. But it's nothing you can't learn off the internet. But at the same time, I don't give you dosages. So here's the thing, folks. We have some sort of unknown possible drug paraphernalia sitting on the bed here. We have the fentanyl pop right here. We have a ton of cigarettes. Just so you know, and this is not official, but completely statistically correct unofficially, if that makes sense. A whole bunch of citrus making drinks around some sort of suspected crime scene tends to lead to methamphetamine. I don't know why they like their citrus drinks. They just do. Coffee filters, funnels, saran wrap. You see this cold pack back box right here? That's going to have ammonium nitrate in it. That's also in this Gatorade bottle. This is a one-pot method. And each one of these scenes could be a crime scene, okay? But I will tell you that I can only confirm that the second two, the car accident, as well as this one, were crime scenes. The first one was a regular picture I found on the internet, and it was pretty interesting, and I thought, this is a good one to jog the mind a little bit. So, but each and every one of these, it could be. So when you start thinking a little bit more about it, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's what we have to go ahead and prepare ourselves a little bit for, because we can be in these probably more often than you think. Is it our job to go ahead and figure out whether we're in a crime scene? No, but is it our job to potentially think that we are in a crime scene? Yes. And that's what we're going to look at today. What is a crime scene? Any location where a crime has been committed or any place that evidence relating to the crime may be found. So the crime doesn't necessarily need to even take place. It could just be a potential area that a crime is going to result later on. So this typically brings the stress level of our responders up, okay, especially the high profile ones. And the problems when we all converge on the scene together is not everybody understands the entire methodology of what needs to be done. For us, fire and EMS, it's pretty simple. We kind of get it. But law enforcement, we may not totally understand, which is why we need to go out there and speak to our law enforcement officers more often, understand where they're coming from. These scenes can be very conflicted. Knowing these people regularly to go ahead and handle them would be a lot easier if we knew who they were, because, you know, things can get intense. Things can also get intense within our agencies. Little self-centered humor just to illustrate that I know you guys know the conflicts within your agencies and who's pulling rank and who's the senior member on the scene. But don't think for a second that law enforcement doesn't have their own issues as well. We just tend to hide them better, okay? But that said, when you have the three-headed juggernaut hitting heads on the scene, and then you have your own internal strifes on the scene, communication breaks down. And we just have to learn each other's roles a little bit better and understand where they're coming from to make things go a heck of a lot smoother. So to illustrate this, I just want to refresh what our main roles are on scenes, okay? Pretty clear. I don't have to read off the slide for you, right? Agree? This is what we do, okay? But law enforcement's role is going to be slightly different. This is what they're going to be looking at, or should be looking at regularly. Scene safety being paramount. If it's a majority of law enforcement officers didn't know when they signed up that they're automatically going to be healthcare providers. They didn't. They take CPR classes, which they understand they have to do. They take simple, it depends on the state and the agency, but they're definitely given CPR. In New York State, for instance, you have to take a 40-hour approved Department of Health course that's centered around law enforcement. So I created the course for the state police. They still use it today with a couple updates. And we gave it to the Department of Health and they put a stamp on it, said, good to go. So very similarly, that happens at other agencies, federal, state, and local. They have to do something similar. But when you ask them to go ahead and help Mrs. Jones get up, they're like, that's not my job. It is and it isn't. You're right. They're not regularly going out to pick up Mrs. Jones. That's what EMS and fire does. But that said, if Mrs. Jones goes in cardiac arrest, it's all of our jobs. So making sure that they do their job and you do your job, they're going to want a little bit of relief from the EMS thing. They're going to be looking to you. That said, this is what their objectives are on each one of these crime scenes. We're going to go over the blue ones to ensure that you kind of understand them in a little bit more entirety. The goal. Do you guys have goals when you go out on calls? What do you like when you go on a call that makes you smile? Patients still breathing when they get to the hospital. In a high stress, yes, I agree with you. Helping the community, good. You do a call, you get something under your belt, it makes you feel good, and then you go home. While law enforcement officers are working, a majority of them want to make an arrest. They want to give a ticket because I don't care who their boss is. 9 times out of 10, they need results. And like I mentioned last night, that law enforcement officer wants to have a purpose to serve the community. How do you show that? Shaking hands and kissing babies all day is not a good way of showing it, but it could be powerful. Writing tickets and making arrests, that's what they signed up to do. Okay, so probable cause is something that they kind of crave and look for. As you get that nice feeling when you take care of a patient, they're looking at something like this. When they get to these scenes, that's what they're thinking. How do we make an arrest in this, one way, shape, or form? So the first thing when they do, and again, take hints all along if you can or you need them. First thing they do is they slow everything down when they get to the scene. They might be going hot, but as they get there, depending upon the call, if it's a burglary in action or something to that effect, a home invasion, they're not going to necessarily declare themselves all the way to the scene. When they get there, they're going to think the +1 effect. And I shared this with you yesterday. That +1 effect is we think that there's 1 or 2 suspects in the house. We should account for 3 or 4. Okay, always add 1 more. So when you come into a room, you clear the room, meaning if there's people there or people not, you ask right away, who else is in the house? Then they start looking for evidence. Evidence is any outward sign that a crime has been or could have been committed, and it has a whole entire segue to it, or should I say there's a lot of components to it. Proof and testimony is one, okay? Getting statements of what people have seen or heard upon arrival. And if you get there before they do, has anybody been deposed? Anybody's given a statement to state or any police officers? Okay, anybody know the difference between a statement and a deposition? A deposition is basically telling us what you have done at the scene and what happened, versus a statement where you're more involved with the crime. So if you use those terms loosely, be careful, because I don't want you to ask your EMS partner, hey, did you have to give a statement too? I think you mean a deposition, because we didn't do anything wrong. So keep that in mind. But that said, talking to the police, has many people had to articulate on scene what they did or what they didn't do or what they found? Comfortable, uncomfortable? It does depend upon the officer, doesn't it? Because some can be big and intimidating, some can be rough and gruff, and some can be almost like it's my neighbor, right? So the power of communication is pretty good with that. But that said, the other types of evidence that we're looking at are fingerprints, blood or bloody fluids, hairs and fibers, wounds, and then we're going to talk about talking to the popo. All right, so first thing, fingerprints. How easy is it to get a fingerprint? Not like what? Not like you would think. Yeah. Everybody see the movies and TV shows, how easy that is? We'll just lift that print right there. Yeah, that rarely happens. In our job, we have evidence technicians. So like even a road patrol member is taught about, you know, the arches, the whirls, and the loops, and how unique they could be to each individual. But that said, we have to go ahead and if we want to attain one of those, we call in an evidence tech. They have been practiced in it a little bit more often than the average road trooper, and therefore, let's bring the experts in to try and do their best expertise to lift that print. When we lift the print, there's an issue. Are we automatically in the state's database? No. Who is in the state's database? Criminals and/or. Are you really? Really? I did not know that. However, feel some comfort, because I don't know your state like I do mine, but in New York State, you can't access people that haven't committed crime. So if you're in an EMT database, we aren't in New York, by the way. If you're in an EMT database, they can't just say, all right, run into that one and run into that one and run into that one so we can find somebody. They need a legal privilege to do that, probably some sort of court summons. But yes, and that's understandable, but yep. Well, definitely the more time that has transpired, the harder it is to get, because you don't know the other elements that are in there. That said, they lift the print. They also have to figure out the priority, and this goes with DNA as well, on how to process this in front of what cases. What's to say that that person is or isn't going to be in the database? If you haven't committed a crime, or let me rephrase that, if a suspect hasn't committed a crime yet, they're not going to be in the database. What good is the print? It's not. Case in point, we had many, many summer camps where one of my patrol areas, and we would have the residents of these camps come in and say, I need you to go ahead and come to my facility. It was burglarized. Okay, what happened? This is in the spring, excuse me. They have a summer camp. They close camp. Some teenagers are in it during the winter time. They're partying, they're drinking. They leave the crap there. They steal the TV. And then they go ahead and months later, they come to the home and it's broken open to the TV's missing and there's beer cans around. So they literally come up to you. You have to print this. I pay your taxes. I want to know who is in my house and I want them arrested. And we have to articulate, this is not a high priority crime, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes, this all did happen. Yes, we will investigate it, probably go nowhere. But at the same point, what it looks like is probably what transpired. So to take that print and tell the governor and or our bosses, this one needs to go to the front of the line because I have a concerned constituent or customer in my area, it's not going to happen, let alone if the print is in there. We'll get a little bit on that when it comes to DNA as well. Latent prints, and so doing these up here are not easy. Have you ever seen that whole entire glove cover with the cyrenacrylate crazy glue and the fumes come in like on TV? Believe it or not, that does work. But again, not very easy to attain because you have to still go in there and lift the print. That said, you can only lift prints off of smooth, non-porous substances. So you start looking around the room on different kind of areas or items. Believe it or not, there's a lot of good surfaces in here. But I'm looking around trying to find something that's not. The back of your chair, the fabric, I'm sorry, the front of your chair, the fabric on it, carpet, items like that, you're never going to get a fingerprint on. So, and it's got to be a full, good print of pressure, you know, in order to go ahead and lift it. Complicated, complicated. So footprints, are these easy to get? Yeah, fairly easy to get, right? I mean, if you think about it, yeah, we can go ahead and lift that somehow, put that, you know, stuff in there and try and match it up as best you can. But, you know, when you really think about it, here's a blood footprint. You can almost see the resemblance, right? Compared to the one that they lifted off of the defendant here. So there's a high probable suspicion that this person was there. But you have to match up the shoes, right? You have to go ahead and ensure, what if they didn't get them that particular day and you don't know what footwear they're wearing? One interesting, stupid, but interesting story. You don't even necessarily need the footprint itself as you do footprints showing a pattern. in way upstate New York, we were having a meth lab problem, and there was a big fire within this house that a bunch of meth heads typically lived at. So we get there, the fire department puts it out, they can't find anything inside, and law enforcement's just doing a check around the border to see if anybody else is hanging around, because everybody ran like ants. And then they noticed that there's a whole truckload of footprints that go out to this big doghouse and then come back. Go out to the doghouse and come back. And the idiots wanted to save all their drug paraphernalia by putting it in the doghouse, thinking that nobody would ever figure out with all those prints that that's where they stashed their meth lab. So once they got home, they were in for a little rude awakening, but we didn't need the footprint per se, as we found the evidence over here. We just needed to connect it with the house. So not the most intelligent. That said, DNA, blood type, these are all different processes to go ahead and cross-reference individuals that may have been there as well. And, you know, the DNA is very, very specific. It is even more specific than your fingerprints. So that's good in a way, but back to the same entire theory with the fingerprint database. What about your DNA database? Not everybody's in it. Mostly in our state, sex offenders have to automatically be in it. But others, you know, it might be voluntary for an occupation, or the lineage, ancestry DNA, that kind of thing. But finding permission to cross those boundaries to go ahead and grab that information, I'm not a lawyer, but it shouldn't be that easy. So where can we find DNA? In all the items listed here. And I used to ask you, you know, where you can find DNA and see what your responses were, but it was kind of a silly question over time. I think the bigger or better question is, where can't you find DNA nowadays? You know, on average, we touch our face 250 times a day. It is, DNA is everywhere. So think about it. You can. Yeah, if at the end of the hair, the root is in there, there'll be DNA. Oh, it's a sarcastic, where can't we find DNA? So, yeah, you can find it anywhere, especially around the scenes. People that are stoking out places to either put on fire or watch a suspect or what have you tend to go ahead and wait, and they can't do anything but, you know, smoke cigarettes. These little things can be noted around the crime scenes. Law enforcement will look for those. Obviously, anything they eat or drink. Issues with DNA, again, has it been degraded? What kind of crime scene and seriousness? Is there any political backing to this, where it might make it more of a higher caliber call in the market, or should I say in the news, where your bosses will be like, this is going to get pushed up to the front, versus others that may not? Has it been degraded? Has anybody seen the Law and Order episode where they took a body and threw it into a shower and put the scalding hot water on to go ahead and ruin the DNA of the body? There's an actual episode on this. And the scary part is, not only do we kind of share this information with the public on broadcasting TV, but in Saratoga Springs, New York, where the big racetrack is, they literally found a body in the tub filled with water 12 hours later. The suspect found out that whole entire DNA thing, threw the female body into the shower, turned on the hot water, and left. And sure enough, within 12 hours, the water kept coming. It went over the top of the tub. It went through the floor. The downstairs resident picked up the phone, said, hey, there's something going on upstairs. They come up, they shut the water off, find the body, they crime scene it. Yeah. Wouldn't that have been a good time not to put your name on the room? Yeah, that's what he did. So he was easily found. Can't make it up, but you got to go ahead and weigh these things. Blood spatter is not like the movies where you're going to see copious amounts of it everywhere. It doesn't work like that. Blood spatter is something, when you walk in the door, you're probably going to be walking on it. Small little specks where you're like, oh, did I step on that? Looking at this kind of, the doorway is right here. You can see a little bit of blood trickle here, but look at how small this is over here. Obviously, if it's something larger on the highway, a gunshot wound on the street or in a house, I understand that you're going to have a large pool of blood. Everybody would. But the spatter is more important because you're trying to put a trail together or a story of what transpired. Take a look at this photo on the left. What do you think, what do you notice about this photo? Okay, there's a whole bunch of things that you guys are correct on that one. Up top, you can see that there's a lock missing, so there was forced entry, correct. Somebody mentioned something about this print right over here. Looks like a palm. I can see that. And because you see all these lines over here by the doorknob, what can you also put together? Spray? Well, yeah, whatever was in one hand, it could have been one hand that went to the wall here, right, in the middle, and then they went for the doorknob and it continued to drip down. Or it could have been two hands. Maybe they were on their knees. What if it was a kid? You know, it's about that height. Wouldn't you agree? The palm might be a little bit big for a kid. Maybe the suspect was on their knees. But when you're leaving to go get something because you forgot something in the rig and everybody's working on the patient inside, and you walk up to something like this and you're saying, oh boy, you know, A, make sure your gloved hand is on, but B, quietly not quietly, gently open up that door, maybe by an upper edge versus grabbing the doorknob with your gloved hand and pulling it open and keeping it open, right? So we don't interfere with any more of that. More blood spatter. Anything that's on the handgun, what does that tell you? Close range, yeah, close range, unfortunately. And then, of course, with that, well, we'll see a little bit more about gunshot residue. Sir Edmund Locard was a French scientist, and he came up with this saying that everywhere that you go, you leave something behind. And he was referring more towards carpet fibers and different kind of I don't want to say greens, but elements that would be on products such as coats, clothing, hair, something like that. And within those things, you can probably find DNA on it, but it's not 100% guarantee. Even if you can go ahead and line up clothing or carpet, you can kind of tell if people have bought something similar and or if they were there at the scene, if it was identified, which puts them at the scene. So this is important for us because do we take patients' clothes off? Yeah. So what were to happen if we went ahead and just cut all the clothes off and threw them in a pile over there? We just cross-contaminated every article of clothing. So helpful hint, we'll go over it towards the end as well, is when you go ahead and remove the shirt, if you have to cut it, but let's put the shirt over here. Jeans will go over here. Underwear, especially in sexual assaults, they will go over here, right? We don't want to pile it all together and watch these things combine because we're not necessarily sure where the technicians are going to find evidence. I'm going to say something, but I do not want you to go ahead and change your policies. It's very helpful to have paper bags that breathe versus plastic bags that don't breathe to put these items in. I'm not telling you to all go run out and buy paper bags for your ambulances. But, I mean, does it take up much room? Would it, does it hurt anything if you were to grab a couple? Again, you don't come upon violent crime scenes like that very often to change your 100% policy and start putting these things in ambulances, but it's something to consider. So in a plastic bag, if it's not breathable, the DNA will degrade, especially put under high stress or heat, very much like that shower condition that I was talking to you about. But inside cars as well, over time, when the sun comes in, it'll beat up DNA. Treat your patient. Treat your patient. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But again, this is the friendly endeavor of stepping into evidence land. If you guys are comfortable with it, it's just from friendly tips. In New York State, people were petrified 10, 15 years ago to touch anything or go in the scenes or do anything. We're trying to change that stigma. You don't have it? Great. Other penetrating trauma and wounds, matching things up to evidence of the scene. So you can see the hilt on the end of this knife here. If you were to see a stab wound and then a small little dot on top, you can almost match it up to the hilt of that knife, because if they came in overhand, that top part would be pressed in. And that's what's important about matching up wounds, especially bat size wounds as well. I have in another presentation a skull that was collapsed during an autopsy right to the side of the temple. And you can clearly see the image of not the bat per se, but of a bat type figure, the way that it struck on the side of the head. You would easily assume that it was a bat. Penetrating wounds. What goes in? What goes in must come out. So you have the round and the trajectory of the round, coming out. Backing up 1 second, what do you notice about this wound? It's charred. What is this black stuff? Gunpowder, yeah, because it was very close. Okay, so, sorry? Could have been, because that's pretty big on the backhand. So, old picture, but a goodie to explain how the round will actually open up and project through the flesh. Scary cases, kids playing with guns. This is going to be, that gunshot residue on hands is going to be something that we'll notice and have a high level or index of suspicion that something shouldn't have happened. But right, gathering statements. Many of these items that are up here are what the law enforcement agency is going to be looking for you to talk about. And if you haven't been in a statement before, the female or male officer should at first be putting you at ease and understanding the objectives of what's going to transpire during a statement. They want to know details of who, what, when, where, why, and if there is a how, you came across a particular scene. Common issues that we come across is drugs and or drinking while in a motor vehicle, on scene, or in the back of your ambulance. Are there a lot of you that like to say, hey, I'm not a cop, but you need to tell me what you're drinking tonight, or if you were doing any drugs? Do you guys go with that? There's a lot of people that do that. I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't. I'm not here to influence your practice severely, but it's a great statement and I love it. Are they going to believe you? 9 times out of 10, they don't. So exactly. They know you're not a cop, but at the same time, the level of helpfulness, they're still gauging when you ask a question like that. Do I tell them or don't I tell them? And it's kind of tricky. It's almost double-edged a little bit. But that said, law enforcement officer wants to know if there's something that they can go ahead and use against that person. And that can put you in a complicated situation, because especially if you know them, right? How much do you want to tell? How much do you not want to tell? They really didn't hurt anybody versus, it was pretty severe. I'll tell you anything that you want to know because that wasn't right. But I wouldn't necessarily put yourself in those shoes. I'm sorry, I wouldn't put yourself in the patient's shoes as I would the law enforcement officer's shoes. If this was your loved one and there was a different EMT or paramedic in the back of that ambulance, would you want them to cooperate if your loved one was the victim? Yeah.
And they are normally more willing to tell you, okay, I drank this,
I like it. So one of the participants usually asks if you are, what you drank or didn't interact. Excuse me? It helps them treat them better. Yep. I concur. I concur. Yeah, but you were honest in the report, so therefore you have nothing to hide, right? Maybe if your documentation was so excellent, they only need the report and they won't have to ask you for a deposition. Yes, sir. So you're opening up a can of worms here, and I like it. So question was asked, if you're in the back of the ambulance and the patient does disclose they were on bath salts or meth or something, and the cop comes up later and says, hey, did they say anything? Do I have to report it? And here's, I believe this is the next slide, actually. What does it hurt you? Besides HIPAA alone, does it hurt you if you go ahead and say it? No? If you, besides HIPAA, take HIPAA out of the equation for a second. So, okay. Okay. So the reason why I said the first question is because in New York State, if that officer is on the scene of that incident and they break away to go to the next scene to follow up on it, they're still investigating it, and it's not part of HIPAA. You were there with them. They're a healthcare provider. Remember when I mentioned that earlier? You can share that information with healthcare providers, even if it's a law enforcement officer that has left the scene to go meet you somewhere else. That's in New York. I would verify where with your medical director here, more than likely that would be the safest bet. I'm sorry? You can tell them. Mm-hmm. Repeat it again. Even if the law enforcement officer was on scene. So you're saying that if they didn't provide care on scene, but they were on scene and that was disclosed, that you can't share it. Okay. And I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong by any means. If that's the way it is in the state and that's the way that you practice, I'm not here to jeopardize that by any means. In New York, you can. Okay. They were there. They're conducting a criminal investigation. And that policy up there for us in New York illustrates that, because this confusion we don't want. So that's the way it works in New York. So good to know though. And that will help the gentleman in the back. So. Good. Yeah, no, the way it should be. Yep. The way it should be. Good. So I think we answered your question. You got another, go ahead. Oh, you're welcome. So yeah, very interesting, but I like it. Hey, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. All right, other things. Yes, so this really starts and ends with understanding everybody's role on the scene, identifying any threats that are around, and avoiding routine. Do you ever hear the expression routine kills? Okay, if you keep going to the same kind of scenes, not thinking about this from a different perspective all the time, you may get sucked into something, a small trap for evidence collection and touching something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. So be aware of that. Alan Gannett wrote a wonderful piece called Purposeful Practice, and he talked about routine. Typically, subject matter experts in the field have to do something like over 10,000 hours to go ahead and be considered experts. But in this book, he actually argues that if you try really hard not to get sucked into the routine thing, and you do 400 hours with purposeful practice, you can also be considered a subject matter expert, because you're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're actually being analytical and looking at it from different perspectives. That's the kind of mentality. The mentality in the beginning of this program, when you were thinking about crime scene or no crime scene, that's the kind of purposeful practice that we need to be bringing to a majority of our scenes that aren't basic cookie cutter calls. So friendly reminder, the number one threat on scene? The human threat. Yeah. We want to make sure that you know the amount of people that are on scene. Weapons don't hurt anybody until they're in the hands of people that want to hurt you. So be aware of that. Oh, my picture didn't come up. I'm sorry. So the human threat, all right? I was wondering why you weren't laughing. And I'm like, huh? That usually gets a little people roused up on that. So yeah, it's the human threat. So be aware of that.
Because that's where the hammer goes. When the advised 21-year-old was going to arrest, driving in the vehicle, not having a license, fire tag.
It's a taser.
At that time, an individual who I didn't know, the male coming from the Speedway store, or approaching the scene. At that time, Phil Evans, the driver, started getting combative. At that time, I tased the individual, and he started to pull back.
He grabs him by the face and violently throws him to the gate of the city, hitting him up. At that point, you can see Evans begins kicking the injured sergeant at 6 feet, besides 13 steel-toed logging.
I was just focused on the person on top of me, and there wasn't a lot I could do with that picture in the face. I ended up having to kind of toss my taser with my wrist because it was used at that time on my ground. I couldn't get to my left, and I couldn't get to my inner bailout.
For people online, we're watching a video of how quickly somebody can take out somebody else within moments that wasn't directly involved with the scene.
Never got the guard. Was the guard.
What did you guys notice about that? He turned his back to the secondary person. Good. What else? He didn't use enough force. Yeah, I'm not saying that the police officer did everything 100% correct, but I'm not here to critique him. I wanted to illustrate that how quickly things can escalate without you even see it coming. Okay. Obviously he didn't. Obviously he should have had a better sense of, orientation of the people that were around him. But that said, it took seconds. That officer was like dazed and confused on the floor before the kicking even began because he wasn't expecting that. And that's how quickly somebody can come up behind you and I on a scene if they were that mad. So again, I know it doesn't happen often, but it happens quickly.
So was that from a police car?
I think so, yeah, because probably the dash cam on the front.
So they
whether
can
it's
run
right.
with one law enforcement person?
A lot of them do, yeah. In New York State, every trooper is by themselves and their backup could be 40 to 50 minutes away until midnight to 5 a.m. Union says you have to pair up. But other than that, yeah, you're by yourself. So that's the safety aspect of it, the +1 that I just want to remind you of. Scene size up. Think about the warning signs when you go to a scene. If it's a known area of criminal intent, keep that in mind. Loud noises, animals. Anybody ever get bit by a dog? They're always the littles.
I have those kind of dogs that I've never seen really aggressive before, but the little, I get bit by
Yeah.
dogs and Pomeranians.
So one of the participants is saying how small dogs are the biters. So this, it's very advisable to go ahead and have them do that, yes. I was at a scene in a law enforcement scenario where I was talking, I walked up to the dog, I said hello, he greeted me, you know that I'm friendly with dogs, I love dogs. We went inside, we took care of what we had to, and I'm leaving. The guy was in agreement with me, we were all on the same page, and I'm leaving, I go down the steps, and I turn around and I see the dog bursting out of the screen door. Like it swung open, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I'm trying to act calm, but I probably picked up my pace just a little without running because I knew if I ran, I would probably be bit. And he came up and bit me right on my ass anyway. So, but yeah, that wasn't fun. But it usually comes without warning. Again, this was a case where the animal was friendly at first. But side note, this was my dog Sarge many, many years ago, lasted 7 years. Destroyed my house. Destroyed. So Yeah, yeah. Jowl towels all over the place. Oh my gosh. They do. Yep. So obviously, I don't have to tell you about intoxication or drug use because you probably see that often enough. But when you approach, figure out where your law enforcement is. You know, you don't necessarily, if you do approach to a regular call and you summon them anyway, be aware of how far that they're out. Go ahead and do you guys always broadcast lights and sirens? No? Okay. There's a national movement right now not to use lights and sirens. So I just wasn't sure if you guys were joining that or not, but there's a few instances where there is, but that's another presentation. So do you have a footpath to the lawn and do you stand in front of the door? Okay, these are common ways. Like, listen, when it's snowing out and there's only one path, I get it. Okay, but if you do have a sidewalk that goes up to a house and then or you have a dirt driveway or dirt road or what have you, do you follow that path right into what's called the funnel of fire, where if somebody were to shoot from inside that they expect somebody to be standing there? Something to consider, like the doors. Okay, when you approach a house, are you standing in front of it? Okay, or are you approaching from the side and knocking with your hand? Just to go ahead and decrease the risk of anything that's going to go through that door and come at you or your team. Other signs of danger, loud noises, identifying yourselves. We talked about the uniform the other day, if you look like law enforcement or not. I didn't really catch that notion too much in this area, but that's a good thing. Concealment and cover, you know the difference when you get to these scenes? If you should know that it's a gunfire scene and you're caught in the middle of it, figuring out where you can hide. I obviously could not hide behind that skinny tree. Versus cover, where a round going through an engine block would be a lot less chances of striking you, but know those differences as well. Exits from the scene. We talked about the purple bag yesterday, so I'm not going to get too much into that, but having that code word is a very good safe technique. And then of course, piling the victim's clothing up, as I already discussed. Try and do separate piles if you're, think about it and you have that ability to do it. Changing gloves between patients, right? That would be helpful as well. Not only to cut down on bloodborne pathogens, but any evidentiary value going from one patient to the other would be important to decrease those chances. Ensure that you do the best you can. It's okay to move things around your patient when you have to go ahead and do your job. It's okay. But at the same point, notify law enforcement of what you touched and how you touched it. Is it our responsibility to ensure that every weapon is unloaded and there's nothing in the action? No, but can we go ahead with your own weapon? Yes. But if you go ahead and move the weapon over to a safer area, right, where there's nobody going to get it, that's good to do, okay? Especially with the +1, if you don't know or if you're unsure if anybody else is in the house, take it, put it into a drawer, close it, and notify law enforcement. I put it there from there because I wasn't sure if somebody else was in the house. And that's only around your direct area of your patient. You don't have to go across the house to do that, okay? Just around your patient area. Documents, same. Stop feeling that you can't do certain things. I kind of described that. As I mentioned, it's not necessarily if, it's a matter of when you step into these scenes. We have to go ahead and be thinking safety the entire time. Who thinks they're the best safety officer? Who should be the best safety officer? You. So keep this, I would even suggest on high stress scenes, if you have the manpower, that you designate somebody as a safety officer and they just sit back and think of +1 and they watch you guys gather in and out for slip, trip, fall hazards to suspects, okay? Think outside the box a little bit to make the people that are doing most of the work safer. That's if you have that manpower. Remember to go home. Everybody goes home. So stay together, do the best thing for each other. And of course, if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. Thank you very much.